So the process for scratching into the surface is perfect for when you have a subject with things in the background that you want to get rid of. And what I have here is this fun photo that I took a few years back from the Coney Island Mermaid Parade. And so I have these people here that I would like to keep in the photo, and some people in the background that kind of take away from the photograph. So this is printed on the traditional paper, the Fujifilm Crystal Archive that I mentioned before. And so I'm gonna dip this into the water to soften the emulsion and then begin my scratching. Okay, so I got my sandpaper and my awl. What I'm gonna do first is come in with my awl to sketch around the areas I want to keep. So it just kind of gives me a guideline. Okay. And then I'm going to take a new piece of sandpaper. That one's a little too wet. And then I'm going to come in and scratch into that surface. So you're kind of erasing parts of your photo. Whenever I teach this workshop to a group of people, I always say it's like Photoshop without the computer. You're literally doing all your Photoshop techniques by hand. And come up and around here and over here. And then I'm going to rinse it off, get that emulsion. Dry up the water. It seems like this water is creating a bit of a glare for the camera. All right, so here, let's get rid of these people over here. The emulsion's still moist even after I wiped it off, so I didn't have to re-wet it. So here, it's kind of a simple step that I just sanded out the sides and sanded out the areas that I wanted to remove, and then I'm going to set that aside. Not every photograph is going to need a ton of technique, which you'll discover as you're playing around. This one here is a photograph of a piece of seaweed that I thought resembled the shape of a tree. But the sanded background here, I'm going to play with quite a bit. So I'm going to start by pointing out that this is also on that classic paper. I'm getting it wet. And I'm going to come in, sand my sides. It's better at this angle. And I'm just going to scrub the surface a little bit just to create a little tooth. Creating a little tooth on your photo surface is also helpful for when you're coming in to add color with different materials. Creates a little surface variation, which you'll see when we come into this guy here later on. So I'm just creating a nice soft surface, scratching it out nice and slow. Okay, and again, I'm going to rinse off the emulsion in the water. And I'm going to set that to dry. When you set them to dry, make sure you put them in a spot where they don't touch each other, because as they dry, if they're touching, the emulsion will almost work like a glue where they get stuck to one another. Let's see here. Now, just to come into the newer photo process, because as you're taking newer photographs and having them printed, you're gonna mostly encounter those new photo papers. So I don't want you to feel like it's completely hopeless that if you have all these photographs that are printed on this paper, that there's nothing that you can do. You can still play with them, you can still embellish them, but it's just a different look that you get with the scratching and sanding. But so I'm gonna take this one, I'm gonna get it wet just to get that surface a little bit softer for my sandpaper. And I'm gonna come in so you can see here it scratches through and almost peels in a what's the best way to describe it, like a full sheet of film is basically sitting on top of this. So when you're, what we're essentially doing is damaging the photos. So as you're coming in, it's peeling those bits off rather than pulling away bits of the photos like we did with the other papers. Oops. So I'm just gonna come in to the edges. And as you sand through, a lot of these newer papers have almost like an iridescent type quality to them, which you'll see as you start to sand, where the that white that you end up going down to has like an iridescent look to it, which you could eventually make work in your favor. And now I'm just gonna distress into there. So this is that bit of film like I was trying to describe before. It comes off, it peels. And so it's not quite as satisfying etching into these newer papers, but if you find the right amount of pressure for that paper, you can still make some marks. Just, you're gonna have to go a little more gentle. Okay. And now, since there's nothing coming up off the surface, I'm just going into it, so this doesn't need to be rinsed off. So I'm going to set this guy to dry. And for this one, I'm just going to prepare this one by sanding my edges, getting it wet. And these are all photos I took from a local carnival. I love taking photos of the different merry-go-rounds whenever I take my kids to a street fair or excuse me, or a carnival or an amusement park. off and set that guy to dry too.